My daughter-in-law poisoned my dog, then said accidents happen to old things. The whole family laughed at my tase. I smiled and called someone special. She didn't know I owned her dream job and the termination letter was ready. The morning Charlie died, I knew exactly what had happened. My golden retriever had been healthy just 12 hours earlier, tail wagging as he followed me around the kitchen while I prepared dinner for what would be our last family gathering. Now he lay still on the veterinary table, his beautiful amber eyes closed forever, while Dr. Martinez delivered the news that would shatter whatever remained of my faith in my family. I'm sorry, Mrs. Henderson, but the blood work confirms it. Charlie was poisoned with antifreeze. It's unfortunately common. Dogs are attracted to the sweet taste, but even a small amount is lethal. Dr. Martinez's voice was gentle, professional, but I could see the concern in her eyes. Did Charlie have access to your garage or anywhere antifreeze might have been spilled? I shook my head slowly, my hands trembling as I stroked Charlie's golden fur one last time. No, doctor. Charlie never went into the garage. He was an indoor dog, only went outside with supervision. My voice cracked on the last word, and I felt the tears starting again. What I didn't tell Dr. Martinez was that I'd seen my daughter-in-law Jessica in the backyard that morning, crouched near Charlie's water bowl with something in her hand. When she'd noticed me watching from the kitchen window, she'd waved cheerfully and called out, "Just refreshing Charlie's water, Mom." He looked thirsty. I thought it was thoughtful at the time. How naive I'd been. The drive home from the vet's office felt endless. Charlie's empty collar sat on the passenger seat beside me, his tags jingling softly with each turn. I'd had that dog for 8 years. He'd been my constant companion since my husband Robert passed away. Charlie had been the one who got me through the darkest days of grief, the one who forced me to get up each morning, to go for walks, to remember that life still had moments of joy. Now he was gone, and I was driving back to a house full of people who would pretend to care. The family dinner had been Jessica's idea, of course. She'd called 2 weeks ago with her usual saccharine enthusiasm. "Mom, we should do these more often. It's so important for little Emma to spend time with her grandmother. And I know how lonely you get in that big house all by yourself." Lonely. The word always stung when it came from Jessica's mouth, delivered with just enough false sympathy to seem caring while actually emphasizing my isolation. She was right, though. I was lonely. At 68, with Robert gone and my son Michael completely under Jessica's influence, most days the only conversations I had were with Charlie. Had been with Charlie. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, gathering strength. Through the front windows, I could see the warm glow of lights, hear the faint sound of laughter. My family was inside, probably wondering where I'd gone with Charlie. They had no idea I'd spent the last 3 hours watching my best friend die. The front door opened before I could reach it. Michael appeared, his face showing mild irritation rather than concern. "Mom, where have you been? Jessica made that roast you like, and Emma's been asking for Grandma all afternoon." My son looked so much like his father, but where Robert had possessed kindness and warmth, Michael seemed to have inherited only the physical features. At 35, he was successful, a marketing executive at a mid-sized firm downtown, but somewhere along the way he'd lost the gentle soul I'd raised. Or perhaps Jessica had simply buried it so deep he'd forgotten it existed. "Charlie's dead," I said quietly. Michael's expression barely shifted. What? What happened?" "He was poisoned. The vet confirmed it, antifreeze poisoning." "Oh." Michael glanced back toward the house, where I could hear Jessica's laughter mixing with Emma's excited chatter. That's terrible, Mom. I'm sorry. But are you sure? I mean, Charlie was getting pretty old. Maybe it was just his time." Charlie had been 6 years old. In perfect health. But I could see Michael was already dismissing my grief, minimizing the loss so he wouldn't have to deal with the emotional weight of it. This was Jessica's influence. She trained him to see my feelings as dramatic overreactions, my concerns as the confused ramblings of an aging woman. "The vet was certain," I said firmly. "Charlie didn't have access to antifreeze. Someone gave it to him deliberately." Michael's face hardened. "Mom, that's a serious accusation. You can't just..." "Grandma." 4-year-old Emma burst through the door and wrapped herself around my legs, her red curls bouncing with excitement. "Mommy made dinner and we're waiting for you." "Where's Charlie?" "I brought him a special treat." My heart broke all over again. Emma adored Charlie, and Charlie had been endlessly patient with her enthusiastic hugs and attempts to dress him up in her play clothes. Charlie's sick, sweetheart. He had to go to the doctor. Is he coming back? Emma's blue eyes, so much like Robert's, looked up at me with complete trust. Before I could answer, Jessica appeared in the doorway, stunning as always in her perfectly fitted black dress and designer heels. At 28, she looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, her blonde hair styled in loose waves, her makeup flawless despite having supposedly spent the day cooking. There you are. Jessica's smile was brilliant, but it didn't reach her eyes. We were starting to worry. Where's the old boy? She glanced around as if expecting Charlie to come bounding up the steps. Charlie's dead, I said, watching her face carefully. For just a fraction of a second, something flickered in Jessica's expression. Not shock, not sadness, satisfaction. It was there and gone so quickly that anyone else might have missed it, but I'd spent 2 years learning to read Jessica's micro-expressions, to catch the tiny tells that revealed her true feelings. Oh no. Jessica's hand flew to her chest in a perfectly performed gesture of dismay. What happened? He seemed fine this morning when I gave him fresh water. He was poisoned, I said flatly. Jessica's eyes widened, and this time the shock seemed genuine. But shock at being caught, or shock at the revelation? Poisoned? That's terrible. Who would do such a thing? Accidents happen to old things, I heard myself say, testing her reaction. Jessica's face went pale, then flushed red. Well, yes, I suppose. I mean, older dogs can get into things they shouldn't. Maybe he found some rat poison or something. The casual way she dismissed Charlie's death, my Charlie, who had been family, sent a cold rage through my veins. But I kept my expression neutral, the way I'd learned to do during 35 years of marriage to a man who'd taught me that sometimes silence was more powerful than confrontation. Maybe, I agreed quietly. Michael put his arm around Jessica's waist, a gesture that was becoming increasingly possessive as the years went on. It's tragic, Mom, but these things happen. Charlie had a good life. Come on, let's go inside, dinner's getting cold. The dismissal was complete. My grief, my loss, my suspicions, all of it was inconvenient, disruptive to their perfect family evening. I followed them inside, Emma's small hand in mine, and prepared to endure what I now knew would be my last family dinner with these people. The dining room looked like something from a home magazine. Jessica had always been obsessed with appearances, and tonight was no exception. Candles flickered on the polished mahogany table, casting warm light over the bone china that had been my mother's. Fresh flowers, expensive ones, filled a crystal vase in the center, and the good silver gleamed against the pristine white tablecloth. It was beautiful and cold, like everything Jessica touched. Sit, sit. Jessica gestured toward my usual spot at the far end of the table, the seat that put me as far as possible from the conversation while still technically including me. I made your favorite, pot roast with those little potatoes you love. It had been Robert's favorite, not mine. But Jessica had never bothered to learn the difference. I took my seat and watched as Jessica served everyone else first, Michael, then Emma, then herself. My plate came last, with noticeably smaller portions and a smile that didn't quite hide her irritation at having to serve me at all. So, Mom, Michael said as he cut into his roast, Jessica and I have been talking about some changes we'd like to make to our living situation. Here it comes, I thought. The real reason for tonight's dinner. Changes? I asked, though I suspected I already knew what kind of changes they meant. Jessica leaned forward, her expression suddenly serious and concerned. We're worried about you, Mom. Living alone in this big house, especially after what happened to Charlie tonight. It's just not safe for someone your age. Someone my age. As if 68 made me ancient and helpless. We've been looking at some really nice assisted living facilities, Michael continued. Places where you'd have people to check on you, activities to keep you busy, medical staff on site in case of emergencies. Nursing homes, I said quietly. Adult communities, Jessica corrected quickly. Very upscale, very dignified. And think of the financial freedom. You could sell this house, it's way too big for one person anyway, and use the money to ensure you're comfortable for the rest of your life. The rest of my life. The phrase hung in the air like a death sentence. Plus, Jessica continued, her voice taking on that artificially bright tone she used when she was particularly pleased with herself. It would free up some resources for Michael and me. We're thinking of upgrading to a bigger place, maybe something with a pool for Emma. And Michael's been wanting to start his own consulting firm, but the startup costs are pretty significant. There it was. The real agenda. They wanted my house, my money, my resources. And they wanted me safely tucked away somewhere I couldn't interfere with their plans. I see, I said calmly. And you've already looked at these facilities? Oh yes. Jessica pulled out her phone and started scrolling through photos. Look at this one, Sunshine Manor. It's only 40 minutes away, so we could visit regularly. They have craft rooms and a nice dining hall, and everyone's around your age so you'd fit right in. She showed me pictures of a bland, institutional building surrounded by other bland, institutional buildings. Everything was beige and safe and soul-crushingly generic. Old people sat in wheelchairs staring at nothing, or gathered around card tables with forced smiles and dead eyes. It was where Jessica wanted me to die. Of course, we'd need to move quickly, Michael added. The housing market is really hot right now, and these facilities have waiting lists. We'd probably need to put the house on the market within the next month or two. Next month. They wanted me gone in a month. And what about Charlie? Emma piped up suddenly. Will Grandma's new house have room for Charlie? The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica and Michael exchanged a look, and I saw Michael give an almost imperceptible shake of his head. Sweetheart, Jessica said gently, most senior communities don't allow pets. It's a liability issue. But Grandma won't need Charlie anymore, she'll have lots of new friends to keep her company. Emma's face crumpled. But Charlie is Grandma's best friend. They can't be separated. My throat tightened. Even my 4-year-old granddaughter understood what Michael and Jessica refused to acknowledge. That Charlie wasn't just a pet, he was family. Had been family. It's okay, sweetheart, I said softly, reaching over to squeeze Emma's hand. Charlie's not feeling well anyway. He might be happier somewhere else. Jessica's smile was triumphant. She thought I was agreeing to their plan, accepting my fate with the quiet resignation she'd come to expect from me. She had no idea what I was really planning. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of false pleasantries and thinly veiled pressure. Jessica talked about the wonderful activities I'd enjoy at Sunshine Manor, chair yoga, bingo nights, sing-alongs with a piano player who looked older than God himself. Michael discussed the practical aspects, power of attorney paperwork, real estate agents, timeline for the transition. They had it all figured out. Every detail planned, every obstacle anticipated. They'd probably been working on this scheme for months, maybe years. Waiting for the right moment, the right excuse. Charlie's death had simply provided the perfect opening. I should probably head home, I finally said as Jessica began clearing the dishes. It's been a long day. Of course. Jessica's voice was full of fake sympathy. You must be exhausted. Losing a pet is so traumatic at your age. At your age. Again with the subtle reminders of my supposed frailty. Michael walked me to the door while Jessica put Emma to bed. In the hallway, surrounded by family photos that somehow never seemed to include me anymore, my son looked almost guilty. Mom, I know this is a lot to process, he said quietly. But we really do think it's for the best. You're not getting any younger, and after Dad died. Your father's been gone for 3 years, Michael. I know. But you've been struggling. We can see it. And tonight, with Charlie. He shrugged helplessly. Maybe it's a sign that it's time for a change. A sign. As if my dog's murder was some kind of cosmic message about my living arrangements. I'll think about it, I said, and I meant it. I would think about it very carefully. Michael hugged me goodbye, a brief, obligatory embrace that felt more like checking an item off a to-do list than genuine affection. Love you, Mom. Drive safely. I walked to my car in the gathering darkness, my mind already working through the implications of everything I'd learned tonight. As I reached for the door handle, I heard footsteps on the gravel behind me. Mrs. Henderson. I turned to find Jessica approaching, her expression difficult to read in the dim light from the porch. I just wanted to say, she began, her voice softer than usual, I know how much Charlie meant to you. Losing him so suddenly, it must be devastating. For a moment, I almost believed she was being sincere. Then I caught the slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Accidents happen to old things, she said quietly, echoing the words I'd spoken earlier. Dogs, people, sometimes it's just nature taking its course. The threat was unmistakable. Charlie today, me tomorrow. I looked at my daughter-in-law, this beautiful, charming woman who had slowly, systematically poisoned my relationship with my son and was now moving to eliminate me entirely, and I smiled. You're absolutely right, Jessica, I said calmly. Accidents do happen to old things. But sometimes, old things have more fight left in them than people realize. Jessica's smile faltered slightly. What do you mean? Nothing important, I said, getting into my car. Just something an old woman thinks about sometimes. As I drove away, I could see Jessica standing in the driveway, watching my taillights disappear into the night. She was probably wondering what I'd meant, whether she should be concerned about my cryptic comment. She should be very concerned. Because what Jessica didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this old thing had been very busy over the past few years. While they'd been dismissing me as a lonely widow, I'd been building something they never suspected. And Charlie's death had just given me the perfect excuse to use it. The house felt impossibly empty when I returned home. Charlie's bed still sat in the corner of the living room, his favorite tennis ball beside it. His food and water bowls remained in their usual spot by the kitchen door, and I could almost hear the jingle of his tags as he followed me through our evening routine. Instead, there was only silence. I poured myself a glass of wine, a good Cabernet that Jessica would have approved of, though she'd never bothered to ask about my preferences, and sat in Robert's old chair by the window. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into its quiet evening rhythm, porch lights coming on, the last dog walkers making their rounds. Charlie would never take another walk. The tears came then, hot and angry and full of a grief that went deeper than just losing my pet. I was mourning the death of my illusions, the final destruction of my faith in my family. For 2 years, I'd made excuses for Jessica's behavior, convinced myself that her coldness was just shyness, her subtle cruelties were misunderstandings. Tonight had stripped away all pretense. Jessica had murdered my dog and was now using his death to manipulate me into giving up my home, my independence, my life. And Michael, my own son, was not just complicit but actively helping her. Well, they'd made a serious miscalculation. I wiped my eyes and reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number I needed. Despite the late hour, he answered on the second ring. Marcus Webb speaking. Marcus, it's Eleanor Henderson. I'm sorry to call so late, but I need your help. Mrs. Henderson. No problem at all, you know I'm always available for you. What can I do? Marcus Webb was 34 years old, brilliant, and completely devoted to what he called creative problem-solving for unconventional clients. I'd met him 3 years ago at Robert's funeral, where he'd approached me with condolences and a business card that simply read discreet solutions. At the time, I'd thought he was just another young entrepreneur trying to drum up business from grieving widows. It took me 6 months to realize he was exactly what I needed. I need you to accelerate our timeline, I said quietly. The Jessica situation has reached a tipping point. There was a pause, and I could hear the sound of typing in the background. Marcus was nothing if not thorough in his record-keeping. Understood. What's the triggering event? She killed my dog today. Antifreeze poisoning. And tonight she and Michael presented their plan to put me in a nursing home so they can sell my house and access my assets. Jesus. Marcus's professional composure slipped for a moment. Are you certain about the dog? Completely certain. She as much as admitted it with a thinly veiled threat. Okay. Yes, we definitely need to move up the timeline. How much acceleration are we talking about? I took a sip of wine and considered. Marcus and I had spent 2 years putting together what he called insurance policies against various family members. The Jessica file was particularly comprehensive. I want everything ready to go by Monday morning. Can you do that? For you? Absolutely. I'll need to make some calls tonight, but yes. Monday morning, Jessica Rodriguez Webb is going to have a very bad day. Jessica Rodriguez Webb. Even Marcus's use of her full name sent a little thrill through me. She'd been so careful to bury her past, to reinvent herself as the perfect wife and mother. But Marcus was very good at digging up buried things. What about the employment situation? I asked. All arranged. The termination letter is drafted and ready to go. Her supervisor has already been briefed on the irregularities we discovered. They're just waiting for the go-ahead. And the other matters? Financial records, immigration status, previous marriage documentation, everything's ready. Mrs. Henderson, when this goes down, it's going to be comprehensive. Are you sure you want to go nuclear? I thought about Charlie's lifeless body, about Emma's innocent question about whether pets were allowed at nursing homes, about the casual way Jessica had dismissed my grief and threatened my future. I'm sure, I said firmly. She wanted to play with old things. Let's see how she handles what this old thing has been building. After I hung up with Marcus, I sat in the darkened living room and let myself remember how it had all started. 3 years ago, when Robert died suddenly of a heart attack, I'd been genuinely grateful for Jessica's support. She'd helped plan the funeral, organized the reception, fielded phone calls from well-meaning friends and relatives. Michael had been devastated by his father's death, and Jessica had seemed like a rock of stability during those dark weeks. It was only later that I began to notice the subtle ways she was reshaping the family dynamic. How she'd gradually taken over the role of family organizer, deciding who got invited to gatherings and who didn't. How she'd started making comments about my mental state, my memory, my ability to manage my own affairs. The first real warning sign came 6 months after the funeral, when I discovered she'd been intercepting my mail. Important documents, insurance papers, bank statements, medical bills, had started going missing. When I confronted her about it, she'd been all innocent confusion and helpful concern. "Oh, Mom, I've been collecting those for you. I thought it might be easier if I helped you organize everything. Your dining room table was getting so cluttered with papers." She'd made it sound like she was doing me a favor, protecting me from the overwhelming complexity of managing my own life. And Michael had backed her up, agreeing that I seemed scattered, and might benefit from some help with organization. That's when I'd started paying attention. Really paying attention. Over the following months, I documented Jessica's behavior with the same methodical care Robert had brought to his accounting practice. I kept notes, took photos, saved emails and text messages. I watched as she gradually isolated me from friends, always with plausible excuses and sweet concern for my well-being. Mrs. Patterson called about lunch next week, but I told her, "You haven't been feeling well lately. I thought you might prefer to rest." The book club ladies stopped by, but you were napping, so I told them you'd call them back. "You haven't yet, maybe you forgot." Dr. Williams' office called about your appointment, but I told them you've been having some confusion lately and might need Michael or me to come with you from now on. Each incident was small, defensible, caring. Together, they painted a picture of a woman gradually losing her grip on reality, becoming increasingly dependent on her family for basic functioning. It was brilliant, really. And it might have worked if Jessica hadn't underestimated exactly who she was dealing with. What Jessica didn't know was that before I'd married Robert and become a full-time mother and housewife, I'd spent 10 years working as an investigative journalist for the city paper. I'd covered corruption scandals, financial fraud, political conspiracies. I knew how to research, how to follow paper trails, how to build airtight cases. And I knew when someone was running a long con. That's when I'd hired Marcus. Marcus Webb specialized in what he called anticipatory justice, building comprehensive files on people who posed threats to his clients, then deploying that information strategically when needed. He was expensive, discreet, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting the people who hired him. The Jessica file had taken 18 months to compile, but it was thorough. We'd started with basic background research and quickly discovered that Jessica Rodriguez Webb had been Jessica Martinez Rodriguez before she'd married Michael. Before that, she'd been Jessica Martinez. And before that, she'd been Jessica Elena Vasquez, born in Honduras and brought to the United States illegally when she was 12 years old. None of which would have mattered to me personally. I had no issue with immigrants, legal or otherwise. But Jessica had built her entire identity around being a wholesome American girl from Ohio, complete with fabricated childhood stories and a mysteriously absent family who'd supposedly died in a car accident when she was 18. More concerning were the financial irregularities Marcus had uncovered. Jessica had worked for 3 years at Pinnacle Marketing, the same firm where she'd met Michael, but her employment records showed some interesting gaps. Specifically, several clients had reported missing funds from accounts she'd managed, though the amounts had been small enough that the company had quietly handled the matter internally rather than pursuing criminal charges. Then there was her first marriage. Carlos Medina had been 57 when he'd married 22-year-old Jessica in a Las Vegas ceremony that lasted less than 8 months. Carlos had been a successful restaurant owner with 3 locations and significant real estate holdings. The marriage had ended when Carlos suffered a fatal heart attack, quite sudden, according to the medical records Marcus had obtained, and Jessica had inherited everything. Everything that hadn't mysteriously disappeared from Carlos's accounts in the weeks before his death, that is. The most damning evidence, though, was what Marcus had found about Jessica's current employment. For the past year, Jessica had been working as a marketing consultant for Meridian Industries, a job that Michael thought involved social media management and client relations. In reality, Jessica was running an elaborate billing fraud scheme, creating fake invoices for services never rendered and funneling the money into accounts she'd set up using stolen identities. It was sophisticated, patient work, exactly the kind of long-term financial manipulation she'd been practicing on my family. The only difference was that Meridian Industries had better auditing systems than a grieving widow. Marcus had documented everything: fake invoices, fraudulent accounts, forged signatures, stolen identity information. We had emails, bank records, video surveillance, witness statements. It was enough to send Jessica to federal prison for 10 to 15 years. We also had evidence of her systematic emotional abuse of me, her manipulation of Michael, and now, potentially, evidence of animal cruelty in Charlie's death. All of it had been sitting in Marcus's files, waiting for the right moment to deploy. Charlie's murder had just provided that moment. I finished my wine and went upstairs to my bedroom, passing the guest room where Jessica and Michael used to stay during their visits. Before Jessica had decided I was too confused and difficult to be a proper hostess, before she'd started insisting they stay in hotels when they came to town. Another subtle erosion of family connection, another step in my isolation. In my bedroom, I opened the safe Robert had installed behind his dresser and pulled out a manila folder that contained copies of all the documents Marcus had gathered. I'd insisted on hard copies as backup, old habits from my journalism days, when sources could disappear and electronic files could be mysteriously corrupted. Spreading the papers across my bed, I reviewed the evidence one more time. Financial fraud, identity theft, immigration violations, elder abuse, animal cruelty. Jessica had been very busy during our family relationship. But so had I. Because while Marcus had been building the case against Jessica, I'd been working on something else entirely. Something that would ensure that even if Jessica somehow escaped criminal prosecution, she'd never be able to hurt me or anyone else ever again. I'd been buying my way back into my family's life. The irony was delicious. While Jessica had been plotting to steal my assets and isolate me from my support systems, I'd been quietly purchasing control over everything she cared about. It had started small. When Michael had mentioned that his company was looking for investors to expand their client services division, I'd quietly arranged for a shell company to provide the funding. Michael never knew his mother was now the primary stakeholder in his employer. When Jessica had gushed about her dream job at Meridian Industries, I'd done some research and discovered the company was struggling financially. A well-timed investment had made me a significant minority shareholder with considerable influence over personnel decisions. When they'd mentioned wanting to buy a house in the prestigious Hillcrest neighborhood, I'd made sure to snap up several properties in the area before they became available, then arranged for one of them to be coincidentally listed at exactly the price point they could afford. Jessica and Michael had no idea they were living in a house I owned, working for companies I controlled, building a life that I could dismantle with a few phone calls. Over the past 2 years, I'd spent nearly $500,000, money from Robert's life insurance and investments that Jessica thought I was too confused to manage properly, to build a web of financial control around my family's life. And tomorrow, Jessica was going to find out exactly how tangled in that web she'd become. I gathered up the papers and put them back in the safe, then got ready for bed. As I brushed my teeth, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. Jessica was right about one thing: I was getting older. There were lines around my eyes that hadn't been there when Robert died, gray streaks in my hair that seemed to multiply every month. But there was something else in my reflection, something Jessica had completely missed in her calculations: that I was not a frail, confused old woman waiting to be managed and manipulated. I was a predator who had been playing a much longer game than she'd ever imagined. And tomorrow, the hunt would finally be over. Monday morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of crisp October day that made everything seem sharp and full of possibility. I woke early, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table with Charlie's empty bed visible in the corner of my eye. The grief was still there, would probably always be there, but it had crystallized into something harder and more focused. Justice. Finally. At exactly 8:30 a.m., my phone rang. Mrs. Henderson, it's Marcus. Phase 1 is complete. Jessica arrived at work this morning to find her access card deactivated and security waiting to escort her to HR. I felt a little thrill of satisfaction. How did she react? According to my contact in the building, she demanded to speak to her supervisor, then tried to bluff her way past security. They're conducting the termination meeting right now, with full documentation of the fraud evidence. She'll be officially terminated within the hour, and the company is deciding whether to pursue criminal charges. And the immigration issues. ICE has been notified about the identity fraud. Given her history and the current charges, deportation proceedings will likely begin within the week. The speed of it was breathtaking. In less than 2 hours, Jessica's carefully constructed life was going to collapse completely. What about Michael? I asked. That's phase 2. I'm meeting with his HR department at 10. The documents we've prepared show his knowledge of Jessica's fraud schemes, circumstantial, but enough to create serious problems for his security clearance and employment status. Michael's company, Prestige Consulting, did government contract work that required extensive background checks and ethical standards. Even the suggestion that he'd been involved in or aware of financial fraud would be enough to trigger a full investigation. He'll probably be placed on administrative leave pending review, Marcus continued. And given that you're now the primary stakeholder in the company, you'll have considerable influence over the outcome of that review. I smiled. Michael had no idea that his mother now controlled his professional future. Timeline for the rest of it. Real estate documents will be served this afternoon. The house they are renting, which they still don't know you own, will receive an eviction notice for lease violations. I've documented Jessica's history of property damage and illegal subletting activities. That had been easy to arrange. Jessica had been renting out the basement apartment to undocumented workers without permission, pocketing the cash and never reporting it to the landlord she didn't know was her mother-in-law. Bank accounts will be frozen by end of business today for suspected fraud activities. Credit cards will be cancelled for identity theft concerns. And the vehicle situation. The car loan. Co-signed by someone whose identity Jessica stole, specifically, you. We've documented unauthorized use of your social security number and credit information. The car will be repossessed before the weekend. In less than a week, Jessica would have no job, no income, no home, no transportation, and an immigration detainer. She'd go from comfortable middle-class life to federal custody faster than she could say, accidents happen to old things. Marcus, you've outdone yourself. Mrs. Henderson, I have to ask, are you sure you want to go this far? This isn't just career damage we're talking about. This is life destruction. I thought about Charlie's trusting brown eyes, about Emma asking if pets were allowed at nursing homes, about Jessica's satisfied smile when she delivered her threat in my driveway. I'm sure, I said firmly. She made her choices. Now she gets to live with the consequences. After I hung up with Marcus, I spent the morning doing normal things, grocery shopping, a doctor's appointment, lunch with my friend Helen from the church volunteer committee. I wanted to maintain my usual routine, to be publicly visible and accounted for when Jessica's world started imploding. It was important that I appear to be just a harmless old lady going about her daily business. My phone started ringing around 2 p.m. Mom. Michael's voice was strained, panicked. Did you know that Jessica was fired today? What? No. What happened? They're saying she was involved in some kind of fraud scheme. Fake invoices, stolen money. Mom, they're talking about criminal charges. I injected exactly the right amount of shock and concern into my voice. Oh my goodness. That can't be right. Jessica would never. That's what I said. But they have documentation, bank records, security footage. Mom, What if this affects my job? What if they think I was involved? I'm sure it will all work out, I soothed. These things are usually misunderstandings. Where is Jessica now? They escorted her out of the building with security. She's been crying for hours, saying someone set her up, that this is all a mistake. Mom, we don't know what to do. Why don't you both come over for dinner? We can figure this out together. There was a pause. Jessica doesn't really want to see you right now. She's pretty upset, and you know how she gets when she's stressed. Even in crisis, Jessica was still controlling access to my son. But not for much longer. Of course, I said gently. Just know that I'm here if you need anything. The second call came an hour later. Mom, we got an eviction notice. Our landlord is saying we violated our lease terms, that we've been subletting without permission. Jessica says she never did that, but they have photos, documentation. I don't understand what's happening. That's terrible, honey. When do you have to be out? 30 days. But with Jessica losing her job and my company talking about putting me on administrative leave. Mom, we can't afford a new place. We can't afford anything. Administrative leave? Why would they do that? They're saying there might be conflicts of interest, that they need to investigate whether I knew about Jessica's activities. Mom, I swear I had no idea. I would never. I believe you, Michael. And I did. My son was many things, weak, manipulated, willfully blind, but he wasn't a criminal. He'd been Jessica's victim almost as much as I had been. Almost. We might need to ask you for help, Michael said quietly. Just temporarily, until we get back on our feet. Maybe we could stay in your guest room for a few weeks. There it was. The same house they'd wanted to force me out of just 3 days ago was now their only refuge. Of course, I said warmly. Family helps family. You're always welcome here. Thank you, Mom. Thank you. I'll talk to Jessica. I hung up and smiled. By the time they showed up at my door, I'd be in complete control of their lives. No more subtle manipulation, no more gradual isolation, no more threats disguised as concern. Just the consequences of their choices, served with a grandmother's love. The third call came that evening, just as I was settling down with a book and a cup of tea. Eleanor. Jessica's voice was rough, like she'd been crying for hours. It's Jessica. Can we talk? Of course, dear. Michael told me about your troubles at work. I'm so sorry. Eleanor, I think someone is trying to destroy my life. All of this, the job, the eviction, the investigations, it's too coordinated to be a coincidence. Someone with resources and connections is targeting me. She was smarter than I'd given her credit for. Not smart enough to avoid the trap, but smart enough to recognize it once she was caught. That sounds very paranoid, Jessica. Who would want to hurt you? I don't know. But I need your help. We need your help. I know we haven't always gotten along perfectly, but we're family. And family should stick together when someone's under attack. Family. Now that her perfect life was crumbling, suddenly I was family again. What kind of help do you need? Money. A place to stay. Maybe you could co-sign for a new apartment, or help us with a down payment. I know you have resources, Eleanor. Michael's father left you very well provided for. Robert's insurance money. She was already calculating how to get her hands on it. I'd be happy to help, I said gently. Why don't you and Michael come over tomorrow? We can discuss what options are available. Really? The relief in Jessica's voice was palpable. You do that? Even after? Thank you. Thank you so much. Of course, dear. I know you do the same for me. There was a pause. Yes, absolutely. Family takes care of family. Jessica, I said softly, I'm curious about something. When Charlie died the other night, you said accidents happen to old things. What did you mean by that? Another pause, longer this time. I just meant that older animals are more fragile. More susceptible to illness and accidents. I wasn't trying to be insensitive. Of course not. I know you loved Charlie. I did. I really did. Eleanor, about that night, I know we talked about you moving to a senior community, but that was just us being overly cautious. We don't really want you to leave your home. This is where you belong. The speed of her backtracking was almost impressive. Now that she needed me, the nursing home plan had been just overcautiousness. That's good to hear. I was worried you thought I was becoming a burden. Never. You're not a burden, Eleanor. You're the foundation of this family. We should have appreciated that more. Foundation. 3 days ago I'd been a confused old woman who needed managing. Now I was the foundation of the family. People were so transparent when they were desperate. Well, we'll talk about everything tomorrow. Get some rest, Jessica. I'm sure things will look better in the morning. After I hung up, I called Marcus one more time. How are our guests of honor handling their new circumstances? About as well as you'd expect. Jessica's making calls to lawyers, but given her immigration status and the federal charges looming, she's not finding much help. Michael's in complete denial, convinced this is all some kind of bureaucratic mix-up that will be resolved quickly. Any indication they suspect who's behind it? Jessica's getting paranoid, asking questions about who might have access to her financial records and employment information. But she's focusing on ex-boyfriends and workplace rivals. The idea that her confused, helpless mother-in-law orchestrated this whole thing never occurs to her. Perfect. Is everything ready for tomorrow's meeting? All the documents are prepared. The contracts, the terms and conditions, the choice we discussed, it's all laid out clearly. Mrs. Henderson, are you sure you want to offer them the option to walk away? After what they've done? I thought about Emma, about my granddaughter's innocent love for both her parents despite their flaws. I thought about Michael, who'd been manipulated and controlled almost as much as I had been. And yes, I even thought about Jessica, young, desperate, far from home, making terrible choices in pursuit of security she'd never had. Everyone deserves a chance at redemption, I said quietly. But only if they're willing to truly change. Tomorrow we'll find out what kind of people they really are. Tuesday morning, I prepared for my guests with the same care I'd once put into hosting dinner parties when Robert was alive. Fresh flowers on the dining room table, good china set for 3, coffee brewing in the kitchen. I even baked Jessica's favorite lemon bars, a recipe she'd once complimented and that I'd never made again after she'd started treating me like an inconvenience. They arrived at 10 sharp. Michael looking haggard and Jessica appearing almost hollow-eyed with stress. She'd lost weight in just 3 days, and her usually perfect makeup couldn't quite hide the strain lines around her eyes. Mom, Michael hugged me tightly, clinging just a little longer than usual. Thank you for agreeing to help us. I don't know what we'd do without you. Jessica's hug was more tentative, but she whispered, Thank you, Eleanor. I know I haven't always been the daughter-in-law you deserved. We sat in the living room, where Charlie's bed still occupied its corner spot. I'd left it there deliberately, a reminder of what had started this whole chain of events. So, I began, pouring coffee from my good silver service. Tell me exactly what's happened. For the next 30 minutes, they laid out their version of events. According to Jessica, she was the victim of an elaborate frame job by unknown enemies. The evidence against her had been fabricated. Her immigration records had been falsified, her financial activities had been misrepresented. Michael backed up every word, adding his own theories about corporate conspiracies and bureaucratic incompetence. It was fascinating to watch. Even facing complete destruction, Jessica couldn't admit what she'd done. And Michael couldn't accept that the woman he'd married was capable of the crimes she'd committed. It sounds terrifying, I said when they'd finished. To have your whole life destroyed by lies and false accusations. Exactly. Jessica leaned forward eagerly. Someone with serious resources has targeted me. But we can fight this if we stick together. With your help, with your connections. What kind of help do you need? Michael and Jessica exchanged a look. They'd clearly rehearsed this part. Financially, we're in trouble, Michael said. My job situation is uncertain. Jessica can't work until this is resolved, and we have to be out of our house in 3 weeks. We were hoping, Jessica added carefully, that you might consider lending us some money. Maybe co-signing for a new apartment, or helping with legal fees. We'd pay you back as soon as this mess is sorted out. How much money? Another exchanged look. Maybe $50,000. Michael suggested. Just to get us back on our feet. I know Dad left you well provided for, and this would just be temporary. $50,000. To get back on their feet after committing federal crimes. That's a significant amount, I said thoughtfully. Let me show you what I've learned about your situation. I reached for the manila folder I'd placed on the side table and spread its contents across the coffee table. Bank statements, employment records, surveillance photos, financial documents, all the evidence Marcus had compiled over the past 2 years. Jessica went very still. Michael frowned, trying to process what he was seeing. What is this? He asked. The truth, I said simply. Jessica, these are records of your real activities at Meridian Industries. Fake invoices, fraudulent billing, stolen identity information. This is documentation of your previous marriage to Carlos Medina and the suspicious circumstances of his death. These are immigration records showing your real name and status. Jessica's face had gone ashen. Where did you get this? Michael, I continued, ignoring her question. These documents show your knowledge of Jessica's immigration status and your participation in helping her maintain false identification. This is evidence of your joint financial fraud activities, including the use of my personal information to secure credit and loans. Mom, I don't understand. This, I held up a photo, is Jessica placing something in Charlie's water bowl Sunday morning. The veterinary report confirms antifreeze poisoning. And this is a recording of Jessica admitting that accidents happen to old things. I pressed play on a small digital recorder, and Jessica's voice filled the room. Accidents happen to old things. Dogs, people, sometimes it's just nature taking its course. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael was staring at the documents spread across the table, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and growing horror. Jessica was watching me with the calculation of a trapped animal looking for an escape route. You've been investigating us, Jessica said finally. All this time, while we thought you were just, you've been building a case against us. I've been protecting myself against people who wanted to hurt me, I corrected. People who murdered my dog and tried to manipulate me into giving up my home and independence. Mom, Michael's voice was barely a whisper. Did Jessica really? Your wife poisoned Charlie, son. She's committed multiple felonies including fraud and identity theft. She's threatened me with physical harm. And she's been manipulating you to help her steal from me and isolate me from any support system. Michael was staring at Jessica now, and I could see the pieces finally clicking into place. The missing mail, the convenient explanations, the gradual erosion of his relationship with me, all of it suddenly made sense. You said Mom was getting confused, he said slowly. You said she was having memory problems, that she needed help managing her affairs. Jessica's composure finally cracked. She is confused. She's paranoid and vindictive, and she's been spying on us for years. This is exactly the kind of crazy behavior that proves she shouldn't be living alone. Crazy behavior like documenting crimes. I asked mildly. Like protecting myself from people who wanted to steal my assets and threaten my life. I never threatened your life. Accidents happen to old things. Dogs, people. Jessica fell silent, realizing she'd been caught in her own words. Here's what's going to happen, I said, gathering up the documents. You have a choice. Both of you. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where Charlie used to chase squirrels. Option 1, you leave. Today. You pack whatever you can carry, you get in your car, and you drive away. You never contact me again, you never come back to this city, you never attempt to involve Emma in your problems. In exchange, I don't turn this evidence over to the FBI, ICE, or the district attorney's office. Jessica was shaking her head before I finished speaking. We can't just leave. We have lives here, jobs, Emma's school. Jessica, I said gently, you don't have a job. You're facing federal charges. Your immigration status is compromised. You have nothing left here except the consequences of your choices. And Michael, she demanded. You'd destroy your own son's life over this. I turned back to face them. Michael has a choice too. Option 2, you both stay and face the legal consequences of your actions. Jessica will likely go to federal prison and then be deported. Michael will lose his job, his security clearance, and probably face charges as an accessory to fraud. Mom, please, Michael started. Option 3, I continued, is available only to Michael. You divorce Jessica immediately. You cooperate fully with the authorities in prosecuting her crimes. You enter counseling to address the manipulation and abuse you've suffered. And you accept the consequences of your choices while working to rebuild a relationship with me based on honesty and respect. The room fell silent again. Jessica was looking between Michael and me with growing desperation. You can't be serious, she said. You're talking about destroying families, separating a mother from her child. I'm talking about justice, I said firmly. And protection. You murdered my dog, Jessica. You threatened my life. You've spent 2 years systematically abusing me while planning to steal everything I have. What consequences did you think those choices would have? Michael stood up abruptly and walked to the window, his back to both of us. I could see his shoulders shaking. I need time to think, he said without turning around. You have until tonight, I said. My lawyer is expecting to hear from me by 8 p.m. If I don't call him with your decision, he'll proceed with turning all of this evidence over to the authorities tomorrow morning. Jessica jumped to her feet. This is insane. You're forcing Michael to choose between his wife and his mother. No, I said calmly. You forced that choice when you decided to abuse his mother and commit federal crimes. I'm just making sure he understands what the options are. And Emma? What about Emma? You'd really destroy her family over a dog. The mention of my granddaughter sent a spike of anger through me, but I kept my voice level. Emma will be protected regardless of what happens. Unlike you, I actually care about her well-being more than my own convenience. Jessica's mask finally fell away completely. You vindictive old bitch. You've been planning this for years, haven't you? Playing the helpless victim while secretly building your little revenge fantasy. I've been protecting myself from people who wanted to hurt me, I repeated. If that makes me vindictive, so be it. Michael. Jessica spun to face my son. Say something. Tell her this is insane. Michael turned around slowly. His face was tie-streaked, but there was something new in his expression, clarity, maybe, or recognition. Mom, he said quietly, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have seen what was happening. I should have protected you instead of this. Michael, no. Jessica's voice was rising toward hysteria. Don't let her manipulate you. She's the one who's been lying and scheming. You poisoned her dog, Jessica. Michael's voice was flat, emotionless. You actually poisoned her dog and then threatened her life. It was just a dog. And I never actually threatened. Just a dog. Michael's voice cracked. Charlie was family. He was the last piece of dad that Mom had left, and you murdered him. I was trying to help. She was too attached, too dependent. You were trying to control her. The same way you've been controlling me. Jessica stared at him, and I could see the exact moment she realized she'd lost him. Fine, she said, her voice turning cold and bitter. Fine. You want to choose the crazy old witch over your own wife? Go ahead. But don't expect me to make this easy for you. You'll never see Emma again. I'll make sure of that. Actually, I said quietly, you won't. I reached for another folder I'd kept separate from the main evidence file. Custody documentation, I explained, spreading out the papers. Based on your criminal activities, immigration status, and documented history of manipulation and abuse, the court will likely award full custody to Michael. You'll be lucky to get supervised visitation rights. Jessica's face went white. You can't. Emma is my daughter. Emma is an innocent child who deserves to be protected from criminals, I said firmly. Regardless of what Michael decides, I will not allow you to use that little girl as a weapon against this family. Jessica looked around the room wildly, like a trapped animal searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Then her expression hardened into something ugly and desperate. You think you've won, she snarled. You think you're so smart with your files and your evidence and your schemes? You're just a bitter old woman who can't stand to see other people happy. Michael will figure that out eventually. And when he does, when he realizes what a controlling, manipulative monster you really are, he'll come back to me. They always do. Maybe, I said calmly. That's his choice to make. But it will be an informed choice, based on truth instead of lies. Jessica grabbed her purse and headed for the door, then turned back for one final shot. Enjoy your victory, Eleanor. Enjoy your empty house and your lonely life and your dead dog. Because that's all you'll have left when this is over, emptiness and regret. The front door slammed behind her, leaving Michael and me alone in the sudden quiet. My son stood by the window for a long time, staring out at nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. How long have you known? About the fraud? About a year. About the manipulation and abuse? Almost from the beginning. Why didn't you tell me? I considered the question carefully. Would you have believed me? Michael was quiet for another long moment. No, he admitted finally. I wouldn't have. I would have thought you were jealous, or confused, or trying to cause problems. She's very good at what she does, Michael. You weren't stupid for falling for it, you were targeted by someone who specializes in manipulation. I let her isolate you from our family. I let her convince me you were becoming a burden. God, Mom, I agreed to put you in a nursing home so we could steal your house. You were manipulated. I was weak. Michael turned around, and I could see the full weight of his guilt and shame. I was weak and selfish and I chose the easy path instead of protecting you. Dad would be ashamed of me. Your father would be proud that you're strong enough to see the truth now and make better choices going forward. What if it's too late? What if I've damaged our relationship too badly to fix it? I walked over to my son and took his hands in mine. Michael, you're here. You're seeing the truth. You're choosing to do better. That's all anyone can ask for. I don't deserve forgiveness. Probably not, I agreed, and he looked startled. But you're going to get it anyway, because that's what love is. Not because you've earned it, but because you're my son and I refuse to let Jessica destroy any more of our family. Michael pulled me into a hug then, holding me tight the way he used to when he was little and had scraped his knee or had a nightmare. I love you, Mom. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I love you too, sweetheart. And we're going to be okay. But even as I comforted my son, part of my mind was already planning the next phase. Because Jessica had been right about one thing, this wasn't over. Desperate people did desperate things, and she still had cards to play. I'd learned long ago that you don't win these kinds of wars by being merciful to your enemies. You win by making sure they can never threaten your family again. Later that evening, after Michael had gone to pack his things and start divorce proceedings, I sat in my quiet house with a cup of tea and Charlie's collar in my lap. The house felt different now, not empty, but peaceful. Like a storm had finally passed. My phone rang once more. Mrs. Henderson, it's Marcus. Jessica Rodriguez just tried to withdraw $40,000 from an account she thought you didn't know about. When the bank informed her the account was frozen, she made some interesting threats. What kind of threats? The kind that suggest she's not planning to leave quietly. We may need to accelerate the final phase of our plan. I stroked Charlie's collar and thought about Emma, about Michael, about the family I was fighting to protect and preserve. Do it, I said quietly. All of it. Tonight. Are you sure? Once we pull this trigger, there's no going back. There was no going back the moment she poisoned my dog, I said firmly. Jessica made her choice. Now she gets to live with all the consequences. After I hung up, I walked through my house, turning off lights and checking locks. In the kitchen, I paused by the spot where Charlie's food bowls had been, and I made him a promise. Justice, my boy. Finally. Tomorrow, Jessica would wake up to discover that old things could bite back harder than she'd ever imagined. And this particular old thing wasn't finished with her yet.